Today, we're embarking on, well, a really crucial journey, actually. We're exploring immigrant protests and labor activism right here in London. You've provided us with a stack of incredibly insightful material, and our mission today is to kind of peel back the layers, extract those vital nuggets of knowledge, and truly understand the historical context, the powerful forces driving these movements, and their enduring impact on one of the world's most dynamic and diverse cities.
Yeah, and what's truly compelling here, I think, is that while there isn't one singular massive immigrant strike in London that dominates the headlines, like some might imagine, the sources actually unveil a much richer, more complex tapestry. It's all about collective action. So we're going to connect the dots across various incidents, things like widespread social unrest, but also highly organized labor disputes, to really grasp the broader narrative of how immigrant communities have not just survived, but actively fought for their rights and really reshaped London in the process.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this then. We'll be looking at everything from, as you said, broad social unrest, like I'm thinking the intense period of the 2011 London riots, to highly specific targeted labor disputes in sectors like construction or fast food maybe. And along the way, hopefully, we'll uncover some surprising insights about how these communities have navigated these huge challenges, showing, remarkable resilience and agency, and leaving a real mark on London's social and economic fabric. So our sources immediately highlight that immigrant communities in the UK, they actually possess a long, often quite unsung history of labor activism. This isn't just about individuals struggling quietly, is it? It's about powerful, organized efforts. And these are particularly visible in low-wage sectors, often overlooked ones, like construction, cleaning, hospitality, care work.
Exactly, those foundational jobs, but often precarious ones, right? The ones that keep London running, and where the fight for dignity is really most acutely felt. And if we place this within the broader context, immigrants in the UK frequently experience what our sources are calling a double burden. So on one hand, they're often marginalized as workers, facing inadequate pay, insecure contracts, sometimes unsafe conditions in these vital but vulnerable industries. And then at the same time, they often encounter marginalization just as, non-citizens or minorities, sometimes viewed with suspicion or even outright hostility by parts of society or through restrictive government policies.
I like that double pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And this dual pressure creates incredibly fertile ground for collective action. You can see why. These protests, therefore, they become essential tools, not just for highlighting specific workplace problems, but actually for challenging those deeper systemic inequalities that impact their very ability to live and work with basic human dignity.
That's a powerful point. It makes it clear, doesn't it, that these movements are not just about wages. They're about fundamental human rights, recognition. Let's dive into some specific incidents that really bring this into sharp focus. Our sources show how these struggles sometimes manifest in ways you might not immediately think of as, like, traditional labor disputes. But they're all deeply rooted in similar issues: systemic injustice, the struggle for recognition, for rights.
Absolutely. And the diverse range of events we're about to explore. I mean, from moments of spontaneous, widespread unrest to highly targeted strikes by specific groups of workers, they all, in their own unique way, reflect these underlying challenges. They might differ in form, sure, but they're unified in their overarching message. It's a demand for fairness, for respect, for a voice.
Okay, so let's start with one our sources bring up early on. A pivotal, often misunderstood event, the 2011 London riots. Obviously not a strike in the conventional sense, like a workplace stoppage. But how did these events, which involve diverse immigrant communities, particularly younger people, how do they fit into our understanding of collective action and systemic injustice?
That's a really crucial question. And what's truly insightful here, I think, is how these riots, despite not being traditional labor strikes, they kind of forced a societal reckoning. A reckoning with the invisible economic precariousness of many immigrant youth and working-class neighborhoods. Our sources suggest that this event, maybe more than any organized protest of its time, really exposed the fragility of social cohesion, especially when economic opportunities are systematically denied, and that's coupled with widespread feelings of being unfairly targeted by police or overlooked by the state.
So the anger was there even if it wasn't an organized strike.
Precisely. While it wasn't a direct labor action, the underlying frustration, the anger, it was intrinsically linked to the scarcity of good jobs. Things like the prevalence of zero-hour contracts, the general precariousness of their economic positions, it all fed into it. And this did lead to some reevaluation, of youth engagement programs, community policing strategies in certain boroughs, even if perhaps long-term systemic change remained elusive. It really highlighted that even unorganized outbursts can compel society to confront its deepest inequalities.
Right. So from that widespread frustration of the riots, we also see how this discontent sometimes gets channeled into more conventional, perhaps, but equally powerful labor actions. And one striking example brings us to the kitchens and counters of London's fast food chains back in 2015. Our material details the fast food workers' strike.
Yeah.
This was part of that broader fight for 15-pound movement, wasn't it? What did this specific campaign reveal about immigrant labor in London?
Oh, this movement was incredibly significant.
Yeah.
Our sources detail how these campaigns, often spearheaded by grassroots organizations like the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, BFAWU, and notably the United Voices of the World, UVW. They used really innovative digital organizing tools alongside traditional picketing.
Ah, interesting. So using new tech.
Exactly. It was quite a tactical innovation in UK labor activism at the time. It enabled the mobilization of workers who were previously thought, unorganizable in these precarious, often non-unionized sectors. And many of these workers were immigrants, often facing not just low wages, typically around, £7 an hour back then?
Yeah, something like that.
But also unpredictable hours, a lack of sick pay, really intense pressure. So the fight for 15 pounds, it wasn't just about a pay raise, was it? It was a demand for dignity, for stability, for recognition in jobs often deemed unskilled, but which are absolutely essential to city life. And it really demonstrated that even in the most challenging sectors, collective action by immigrant workers could ignite a powerful struggle for fundamental rights.
Absolutely. That shows incredible ingenuity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Organizing where traditional structures might not even exist. But beyond those immediate labor concerns, our sources also highlight that these movements often tapped into deeper societal issues. Can you elaborate on how these protests went beyond the workplace, how they challenged broader systemic problems, like the ones that came crashing into view with the Windrush generation scandal?
Right, the Windrush scandal,
Yeah.
which really erupted in 2018. It's such a harrowing example of how state policy can just profoundly impact immigrant communities. And this wasn't about new arrivals, remember. This involved individuals from Caribbean Commonwealth countries who arrived legally before 1971, people who contributed to British society for decades. Yet, because of, a deliberate lack of documentation initially, and then the hammer blow of the hostile environment policies, many were wrongfully detained, denied legal rights, threatened with deportation, some even wrongly deported.
It's awful to think about.
It is, and our sources often quote individuals from the Windrush generation, describing the utter bewilderment, the terror of getting deportation notices after decades here. Decades of working, paying taxes, raising families. One individual I remember reading poignantly recounted, "It felt like being erased from a story you helped write."
Wow. That's truly heartbreaking. So how did this policy, the hostile environment, which was supposedly designed to target undocumented immigrants, how did it end up impacting people who were legally here, who had built their lives here?
And that raises such a critical point, doesn't it? The indiscriminate nature. The often inhumane consequences of that policy, introduced under Theresa May's time as Home Secretary, aimed at making life so difficult for undocumented immigrants that they'd voluntarily leave. This included really stringent checks: unemployment, housing, healthcare, effectively turning ordinary citizens, landlords, employers into de facto immigration officers.
Shifting the burden.
Precisely. And for the Windrush generation, many of whom lacked formal documentation simply because it wasn't required when they arrived. This policy led to unimaginable hardship. The protests that followed were massive, and they weren't just about seeking justice for those specific individuals, vital as that was. They ignited a national conversation about systemic racism, the profound lack of accountability from the Home Office, and the devastating, far-reaching impact of these policies on all immigrant communities, regardless of their status. It showed how a policy intended for one group could just spill over and devastate another, sparking huge public outrage and significant political pressure for reform.
It's a really stark reminder of how policy can just intersect with personal lives in such devastating ways.
Yeah.
Our sources also point to more specific targeted labor actions too, like the 2019 migrant worker strikes in the construction sector. What do these incidents tell us about the specific challenges and maybe the triumphs of immigrant workers in one of London's most visible industries? I mean, you see cranes everywhere.
Yeah. This example is particularly illustrative exactly because London's skyline is constantly being reshaped, and a huge portion of that work, as you imply, is done by migrant laborers. Our sources detail how these construction workers, many from Eastern Europe, but other parts of the world too, were often employed on major development projects right across the city. Yet, they faced appalling conditions. We're talking about rampant wage theft.
So not getting paid properly.
Yeah, pay being withheld or significantly below minimum wage, a severe lack of basic safety equipment. Think about how dangerous these sites can be. And arbitrary dismissals, just fired without notice, without severance. So these protests, like some detailed by the UVW Union against major contractors, were a direct challenge to that often invisible exploitation happening on very visible sites. Their demands weren't just for better wages, though that was key. Crucially, it was for safer working conditions, proper contracts, job security, just fundamental protections often denied to them. It highlighted how essential, yet how vulnerable, these workers are, underscoring the ongoing need for collective bargaining, for strong advocacy, even in what might seem like established, highly regulated sectors.
Okay. So, pulling this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, as you navigate and understand the intricate dynamics of London, how communities advocate for themselves? Our sources really emphasize that these protests, despite their varied forms, riots, strikes, scandals, they consistently surface a common set of enduring issues. It's not just about isolated incidents, is it? It's about persistent systemic problems.
Precisely. These diverse actions are not isolated at all. They repeatedly draw attention to several critical problems that really demand societal awareness and action. First, they vividly expose rampant labor exploitation. Immigrants, particularly those in precarious work, often face alarmingly low pay, excessive hours stretching way beyond legal limits, unsafe working environments, and very few, if any, protections. Think of workers toiling in kitchens with bad ventilation, or on construction sites without the right safety gear.
Yeah, the
basics. Second, these movements are fundamentally about fighting for equal rights, ensuring that immigrants, regardless of their legal status or country of origin, are treated fairly under the law, that they're entitled to the same fundamental protections as any other worker in the country. It's a real challenge to create genuine equity in the workplace and beyond.
And it clearly goes beyond just the workplace, doesn't it? These protests challenge broader societal injustices, too.
Absolutely. They are also about challenging discriminatory policies, like the hostile environment we discussed, or overly restrictive legal migration policies. These disproportionately affect immigrant communities. These policies create significant barriers to integration, to feeling secure. They foster this pervasive climate of fear and insecurity. Furthermore, these protests courageously bring attention to the insidious presence of racism and discrimination from employers, colleagues, sometimes even customers, making daily life and work environments incredibly hostile, isolating. They also crucially highlight the critical lack of access to healthcare and essential benefits for many, especially those with temporary or undocumented status, leaving them exceptionally vulnerable if they get ill or face hardship without any safety net. And finally, these movements actively push back against the negative impact of tough immigration laws that often lead to increased deportations, detentions, tearing families apart, denying people their right to belong after years, sometimes decades, of contributing to British society.
Wow. So we've explored some really significant moments in London's immigrant activism, from the widespread social unrest of the 2011 riots to specific labor disputes like the fast food and construction workers' strikes, and the profound, deeply personal impact of policies like the hostile environment. It's clear, isn't it, that these movements aren't just spontaneous reactions. They are driven by fundamental issues. Fairness, human dignity, the very struggle for survival and belonging within this complex city.
Yeah, and what's truly compelling here, I think, is the sheer resilience you see in these communities. These protests highlight their continuous, often arduous struggle, not just to survive under frequently oppressive conditions, but actually to thrive, to build meaningful lives, and to ensure basic human and labor rights are extended to all, irrespective of their origin or perceived status. Which raises an important question, maybe, for you, our listener, to consider. How does understanding these specific struggles in London help you recognize the broader forces at play in society, the systemic issues of inequality, and perhaps even illuminate similar dynamics within your own communities or your professional environments? It's a pattern that, once you start to recognize it, is actually quite difficult to ignore.
A very powerful thought to consider indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into London's immigrant protests and labor activism. We hope this has given you a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of these vital movements and the enduring fight for justice and equality.